are listening to the podcast Discarded. Here we will be covering stories of unsolved missing persons, cases of those who have been forgotten, cases of those who have never been given a voice, cases of those who were never given a fair or thorough investigation. With each of these cases, there is still a family that is holding on to hope. In this series, we will be discussing the case of missing person Jennifer Poole of Bayshore, New York, and I am your host, Lin-Marie. Welcome, and thank you for listening to the first episode of Discarded. As mentioned in my intro months back, I'm neither a professional investigative journalist nor a known radio personality. I'm just a lady with a legal background who, like many of you, have a slight obsession with true crime and web sleuthing, and thought this would be an opportunity to put some of those skills to good use. I also thought it was important to try and bring exposure to cases that were not necessarily front and center in the media. It's been reported that there are up to 90,000 missing persons cases in the U.S. at any given time. Many go unsolved, and for various reasons, we only hear about a handful of these cases. I chose to cover this story, the story of Jennifer Poole, as my first case since her sister has been a family friend for decades. I'm also happy to announce that I'll be partnering with YouTube channel Missing on Long Island. We will be working in tandem on this story, and they will be releasing an episode focusing on Jennifer Poole Story as part of their series, set to be released in winter of 2020. I ask you to forgive the audio quality as well, since I'm now working with a malfunctioning mic, but at the end of the day, we're still bringing you some killer content and storytelling. In this episode, I want to introduce you to Jennifer Poole, who we will refer to her as Jenny. I want to introduce you to her as her friends and family knew her, and I'd like to discuss the events, or what we know of the events that led up to Jenny's disappearance. Even though it is close to 10 years later, we're going to give our best effort to bring some exposure to the story and hopefully get some answers for Christine and her family. Jennifer Poole was last seen on or about April 29, 2010 at her home on Mowbray Drive in Bayshore, New York. She was 38 years old at the time she went missing. After her disappearance, Jenny's sister Christine dedicated all of her efforts into searching for her sister. She tried raising awareness and bringing exposure to the case. She created flyers, social media pages, kept in close contact with law enforcement, and attempted to contact every media outlet in hopes that someone would listen. Just when she thought she was making some headway, her efforts were overshadowed by the media coverage of the Gilgo Beach murders. The Gilgo Beach murders were discovered shortly after Jenny's disappearance. Also note that the Gilgo Beach dump site is 9 miles from where Jenny was last seen, and Jenny did fit a similar profile of those victims as well, but we'll touch on that later on in the podcast. That said, the only media coverage that Jenny received was this short clip aired by Nancy Grace.
Let's find another of America's missing. Jennifer Poole, 39 years old, vanishes April 28, 2010, Bayshore, New York. White, female, 5'6", 140 pounds, brown hair, brown eyes. Take a look. Tattoo on neck says Joey. If you have information, please call 800-220-8477. If your loved one is missing and you need help, go online, cnn.com/Nancy Grace.
So big thank you to Nancy Grace for taking the time to mention Jenny on the show. Now, I've had the opportunity to talk with several friends and family members of Jenny's. While I knew of Jenny and many years ago met her personally on a few occasions, I really didn't know her story. My recollection of Jenny was that she was fun, charismatic, she was always laughing, smiling, loved to have a good time, bit of a wild child, and definitely not your average girl next door. Like many, Jenny had her demons. I learned that Jenny suffered from mental illness. I learned that Jenny began to self-medicate at an early age. When she was young, she fell into the wrong crowd, and that combination just led to the life of addiction and chaos. Regardless of the chaos, she never went unloved. Like most families of addicts, there are ups and downs, and while you hate the disease and everything that comes along with it, you never stop loving the person. And that's what I hear while talking to Christine.
My name is Christine. Jenny is my sister. Jenny was born May 26, 1971 in Southside Hospital in Bayshore, New York. Jenny was the middle of the 3 children. I have a younger brother, and Jenny was my younger sister. Jenny was always hyper as a kid. She didn't like school very much. She would go to school and want to come home. She would cut class. Things started going really bad around the age of 12 or 13 years old. Started hanging out with the wrong people in school and didn't like to go to school. Later on in life, we found out that she was diagnosed with bipolar, when back then they really didn't diagnose children with anything like that. She wound up dropping out of school. Later on in life, she went back and got her GED and actually went to medical billing school and got a degree in that. Most of our childhood, we grew up between the states of New York and Florida. So we loved to fish. We loved to listen to music together. We would just do fun, crazy things like that. And then all of a sudden, something in Jenny's brain would go crazy. And it was like you couldn't really talk to her, and she didn't want to be part of a family, and things would just go awry. But we used to have some great times together, and we would go out fishing. We would stay up all night and bring a radio outside and sit on the dock and fish. And when we got older and she started driving, we had which I still have, is her big blue truck, which she painted purple, but she still named it blue. And it has a full retractable roof, so we would take it off and we would get stuck in the rain and laugh and just have a good time, go to concerts in it. And it's very sad to see it sitting here now because it does bring back a lot of fun memories that we did have together.
What do you miss about Jenny?
I miss having a lot of fun with Jenny. I miss laughing with Jenny. We used to just laugh about stupid things. Like, a song would come on the radio and we would just start laughing and making up words, and it was just hysterically funny. You know, we had a whole song about the song Feel Like Making Love. We would sing Feel Like Baking Cookies, and then we were like, you take 2 scoops of this and that, and we would just laugh and have fun. And it's kind of sad now because, you know, songs will come on the radio, like new songs, and we would call each other. Our band would be touring, and we would call each other and be like, oh my God, we can't wait to go to see the show. And we would go and have a great time, and now I don't have that. And many times, you know, a song will come on the radio or a band will be touring that she loves, and I sit here and say to myself, me and her would be going and laughing and having a great time, and that's no longer the case. And, you know, there is something else, too. It didn't matter if my sister was doing drugs, if she was living on the street or anything. She never, ever once missed my mother's birthday, no matter what. Jenny would go through bouts of doing drugs at times. It would be really bad for a while, and actually physically you could see it on her. She would get very thin. She would come around asking for money, and it was just very sad to see. She did go to rehab Seafield. She went to Seafield twice. And actually, that's when the second time she went to Seafield is when she went and got her GED, and they did a occupational test, I think it was, to find out what she would like to do later on in life. And she really didn't know. You know, she was like, I don't know what I'm good at and bad at. So they went through all these testing, and they found out that she would be good as a medical biller, that she had like a mind for that. So my mother went out and bought a Dell computer for her, you know, bought all the software for her and everything, and she learned how to do this. And it was getting to the point where we thought she'd get a job and things would get better. But as with most drug addicts, sad to say, it's that turn that's always there. It's that everyday struggle of, you know, you run into somebody, you see somebody, something happens, and it would just turn on a dime, and all of a sudden she'd be back to what she was doing before. You could physically see in her that, you know, she was using drugs. She'd be very thin. She would be asking for money, asking for things, and then all of a sudden, you know, she would straighten up her life and she would gain weight back. She was never really very heavy, but you could see she looked healthy. I guess that's the best way to say it. She would look healthy, and she'd want to do things and have a life and like be part of the family. And, you know, she got it very into gardening here. She had the whole backyard all the way around the yard. It was all filled with flowers and all kinds of beautiful trees and everything. And she'd go out there and spend the day planting and watering and taking care of everything. And at the time we had a dog, my little reindeer, which we called Woofy. And she would sit outside with hours for him and just water and plant and just love the whole yard, you know. And it was really cool to see because you knew she was in a good place at that point.
But then it would change.
And then it could just change like on a dime, you know. It could be that she went down to 7-Eleven and ran into an old buddy, went to a store. We could have went to a concert and she ran into somebody that years ago she did drugs with or something, and then all of a sudden she starts hanging out with them again. So, it would just, you never really knew what triggered it, but there was something there that triggered it, that it would be perfect, and you would think, oh, she's doing wonderful and life is great, and then the next thing you were like, oh, we're back to this again. And it was just sad. It was a sad roller coaster, and it's sad to see when you can't do anything to help that person, because when they get back into that drug state, they don't want to hear from anybody. They're just looking for the next fix. And then when they get out of it, they go, oh my God, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to do that to you. And, they're sincere about it, but you never know when it's going to go back the other way.
So closer and around the time that Jenny went missing, was she in this chaotic state of drug use that you know of?
Yes. At the time when she was living where she was living in Bayshore at the time, from what I've heard from people, she was doing heroin at the time, and the people that I heard she was hanging out with were involved in that kind of stuff. So, it leads me to believe that that's what she was doing. And the last time that I saw her at her apartment, she was very thin. So it, another sign that she was on the drug side of life at that point.
So what events led up to Jenny's disappearance? The details are not clear to me, but the general story I gather is that Jenny did have an on and off boyfriend named Joey, and we'll talk with him in a later episode. Both Joey and Jenny needed a place to stay, somehow ended up living with a gentleman in Cold Spring Harbor. Christine, can we back up and talk through the time frame just prior to Jenny living in Bayshore?
Jenny was living in Cold Spring Harbor with a friend of hers named Chris. Just a little bit to explain her erratic behavior. I don't know where she was living at the time. She wound up making a sign, going to a grocery store and hanging a sign up saying, "Cool chick looking for a room for rent." And this gentleman wound up seeing the sign and pretty much took her home that day and helped her out financially. She wound up moving in with him. I'm going to say she was there. It was over a year. I don't know exactly how long she lived there with him. He was helping her out financially, and then there was a lot of turmoil at the house. The neighbors didn't like the loudness of parties, and because my sister was in a bad state at that time, it was just a bad situation. There was a lot of neighbors called, police came, things like that, to the point where actually wound up losing his house. They got thrown out of the house. All of his furniture went to the curb, and they needed a place to live. At that point, found a realtor, Barbara, and Barbara had an apartment in her house in Northport, and wound up moving in there with her, but Jenny couldn't move in there because it was only for one person. So Barbara said, I have a brother who has a house at Bayshore. He does have an apartment for rent, and said that he would pay for the apartment for Jenny to live there. And that was the last place that she lived that I knew of.
So Jenny is living in this apartment in Bayshore, and how long was she living there before she went missing?
I went and visited her twice there. I would probably say that was, I'm going to say 3 to 4 months before she disappeared. So I'm not sure how much longer before that she lived there exactly. I know that Bruce was paying her rent. I do have a copy of the rental agreement that her rent was up to date. So I don't know the exact time frame of when she moved in there.
Okay. So let's talk about some of the events closer to the time that Jenny disappeared. When was the last time that you actually saw Jenny?
The last time I actually saw Jenny was on April 12th of 2010. She called me at my job, and she asked me to come over to her place, which was the place in Bayshore. I worked in Islip at the time, so I was the next town over. It was very easy for me to get there at lunchtime. And I got over there, and she had a big gash in her head. There was, she asked me to please wash the blood out of her hair, so we went and we got shampoo. I was, washing her head in the sink. I got all the blood out of her head, and then I saw, this big gash. I said to her, what happened? And she said she had no idea how she got it. And now I do remember at the time that, when I saw her, I've seen her before this time that she called me. We went to lunch once. We went grocery shopping over there once. And, I did notice she was very thin.